So today we have with us a presentation by Suzanna Schell, Sarah Gant, and Craig Jensen, all from the I call you guys the legacy folk because I know there's a difference between the fund and other things. Maybe we can just go around and introduce ourselves, where, everybody on the call, your name, where you're from, if you're associated with a Quaker meeting. And I guess I can invite people in so that we know when to step into the circle. So I've got someone on a telephone who it's 1-919-619-6490. Would you like to?
Yes, hello. I don't know if I'm muted. This is John Bell in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, with the Chapel Hill Friends Meeting.
John, I can hear you, and it's a delight to have you here.
Thank you.
So I'm going to circle. Who's next? Jenny?
Hi, I'm Jenny Isbell Shin. I'm a member of Mount Toby Meeting in New England Yearly Meeting. I'm glad to be here.
Ruth Ann, we're introducing ourselves and where we're from.
I'm sorry, I was surprised by the video. My name is Ruth Ann. I'm living in Delaware, in the Lenape Indian Tribe of Delaware Federal Census District, and working with Quakers in the Philadelphia region to facilitate honor.
Great, thank you for being here. Janet?
I have a recalcitrant mouse.
You're doing great.
I'm Janet Huff. I'm from Cobscook Meeting, which is in Passamaquoddy territory, down East Maine. New England Yearly Meeting.
Welcome. Berta, would you like to say hi and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Berta Britz from Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting, Philadelphia.
Great. And Paulette has just come on. Would you like to introduce yourself, Paulette, and say where you're from?
I'm from Cincinnati, Paulette Meyer.
It's delightful to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
And the folk who are going to be talking to us about their wonderful work with the legacy funds. Suzanna, would you like to say hi and where you're coming in from?
Hi, friends. I'm Suzanna Schell. I'm a member of Beacon Hill Monthly Meeting in Boston, and I'm here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is formerly the territory of the Massachusetts and the Wampanoags.
Wonderful. And Sarah?
I'm Sarah Gant. I'm a member of Beacon Hill Monthly Meeting, and I live in Newton, Massachusetts on Wobbin Hill. And my land abuts a path that John Eliot, the first preacher to the native peoples in this area and the first creator of a Wampanoag dictionary and Bible. There's a path that goes from the top of my hill to Roxbury, Massachusetts, which is where his church was located.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Craig, would you like to say hi? And can't hear you, Craig. You're not on. Maybe try plugging in again. I hear something now. Can you try talking? No. What you might want to do is try dropping out and coming back in. Okay? We'll hopefully see you in a little bit. So we also have somebody in Arizona.
I hope I'm in the right place. I'm Gretchen Reinhardt, Quaker from Tempe Friends Meeting.
Gretchen, we're here talking about the legacy funds with the Releasing Ministry Alliance Opps. Is that what you were hoping for? Terrific.
Yes.
So you are in the right place.
It was showing up in my calendar as an hour later from now, but something said that it was now.
Oh, I'm glad that said that. Craig, let's see if we can hear you now. No. Is anybody have any thoughts about what might be going on for Craig?
Do you have the mute button checked?
It's not on mute.
I'm wondering if he's having internet problems.
You know what might help, I wonder. Craig, are you in an area where there's not a lot of bandwidth? Because if that's the case, it may be better for you to turn your video off and see if the sound comes through at that point.
This is Ruth Ann. Did you see his chat message that said he's changing machines and he'll be right back?
Okay.
But he can hear us clearly if we want to carry on.
Okay, great. Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Valerie as well. Would you like to introduce yourself? Valerie, are you there, or someone with the name of Valerie with no video? Okay. Well, the only thing that I have a concern about right now is that we're not, Craig can hear us, but we can't hear Craig. So I wonder if there's an interest in coming in by phone, if that's possible.
Or if Craig had something to say, he could chat. He could do the chat feature.
Yeah, he's going to be he's going to be one of the panelists, so there'll be a lot of chatting.
Okay.
I think I'm just reading the message that he left us, switching machines. So I think I'm guessing that he's going to join us as soon as he gets his machine going.
Okay. So he says that he can hear, and maybe when it we know that Craig is a little bit later in the lineup, so we can get started and hopefully have him on board when I'm mixing my messages there. But
I can also say from experience that you can call in on a telephone and cell phone and keep your video on the computer. That way you
Right.
get the sound one way and the video the other.
Right, which is that's sort of what I was suggesting if the sound doesn't come through on the devices that he's presently using. Thanks for mentioning that again, Jan. So in my experience, and it's from a distance here in Philadelphia, I've been seeing some incredible stuff coming as a result of the legacy fund work and the way that the ministries are being supported and such. And my thought was that it was of use to be able to share this story with others so that they can see, as I had the conversation with Suzanna, and then later in time with Sarah and Craig, what I heard were sort of quadraphonic in a way, different stories of how that has been happening, all of which sum to what Suzanna, when I first spoke with her, described as holy abundance. Without further time, I'm going to ask Suzanna to just come on in and tell the short story of the legacy work, and then we're going to hear from Sarah and Suzanna again. Craig will talk about his experience as a grantee, and then we'll go back and forth a little while with some time towards the end for questions and conversation. So let's proceed. And there you go, Suzanna.
All right, so I want to just give a really brief introduction so we can get to the meat of the matter. So what is the Legacy Gift Funds? It's a funding program of New England Yearly Meeting that began in 2012 with discernment across the yearly meeting about what to do with the proceeds from the sale of a property in Hingham, Massachusetts. We spent a number of years discerning, and in 2014, we were clear to move forward with a funding program, and the Legacy Gift Committee administers that program. It consists of two funds. One is called the NEYM Future Fund, and then the other is the Witness and Ministry Fund. They have slightly different focuses and slightly different ways of looking at how to steward money. Just to sort of get it out quickly, we sold this property for about $1.2 million, and we took $750,000 of it and set it aside and invested in our yearly meeting pooled funds. And that is the Witness and Ministry Fund, and that we fund witness and ministry programs out of the income on that. The balance, the remainder, after we took the $750,000, is called the Future Fund. And we took a very different strategy with that, which was, let's just spend it all. And it turned out to be about $450,000. So let's just see what would happen if we were pretty generous and liberal about seeding ministry. And we support the ministries of New England Yearly Meeting, both within New England and beyond. So we tried to create something that was pretty open. So that's the basic story. Just as a sort of an overview.
Great. And Sarah, when we spoke, you talked about there being almost like a pre-story. And I wonder if you could share that piece at this time.
Yeah, so I think that this pre-story is pertinent because I think this is something that comes up among friends. And also typical of Friends, the pre-story goes back pretty far. So the beginning of New England Friends House home, the property that we sold to create the funds that would become the Legacy Gift Funds. In 1886, Sarah Nichols Pope Dixon, a woman in Salem, Massachusetts, left in her will a home and an endowed fund for retired spinster Quaker women. A home for retired Quaker spinster women. And it was a place for these women to live. And it went along apace. In 1905, this good idea created a seed in Sarah Alice Huntington, who donated her home in Amesbury, Massachusetts for a similar purpose. Eventually, the Pope Dixon funds were joined with the Huntington Home funds, and starting in 1958, there was the Huntington Dixon Home. Again, who lived there was a bit expanded beyond Quaker spinster women to just include people who needed basically a boarding home support community. But that building was basically not up to licensing standards by 1958. And Polly Thayer Starr from Friends Meeting at Cambridge moved to donate her family home in Hingham, which became the New England Friends Home, in 1962. So that was the beginning of the property and the purpose of that property that was New England Friends Home that would become the basis of these funds.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, from 1962 on, to be pretty general about it, there were staffing. It was certainly well-intentioned and well used by Quakers originally. And over the decades, there were significant staffing issues. The staffing was transient, it was underpaid, it was largely based on volunteers, which sometimes were present and sometimes not. And as the number of Quakers used the home less, and licensing standards for these sorts of facilities became more and appropriately rigorous, basically every decade there was conversation about, should we lay this ministry down? Is there still a vitality to it?
Mm-hmm.
And every decade when this discernment happened, there was some renewed energy, a little bit of financial energy, and the home continued. And it continued for another 40 years. Into 2012, when there were no friends, there had been no friends living in the home for several years, licensing standards for the shift from a nursing home, basically a boarding house, with meals and some care, to an assisted living facility. That was a very significant shift in licensing, in the credentialing of staff, in the financing of the property. And there were staffing, licensing, and financial issues of some significance. And New England Yearly Meeting was facing some serious liability issues, at which point discernment happened that led to the selling of the home to an organization that would continue it as an assisted living, in fact, a dementia-specific facility, in a business that had many types of these facilities and was used to running them. This backstory is important because that's how the funds were generated for the Legacy Gift Fund. The backstory is important because it's very hard for friends to lay down a ministry. It's very easy for friends to want to honor the good intention of those who have gone before us and to continue that work as the stewards and fiduciaries that we are and that we strive to be. And yet the reality is that friends were not up to the task as the nature of the task changed, and yet spent many decades facing the decision and the truth of it was not a vital ministry of New England to care for elders in this way. It was not a living ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it took many decades for us to lay it down and to release those funds to ministries that are vital.
Mhm.
And that leads back to Suzanna and her story of the Legacy Gift Committee.
Great.
So as the Friends Home was being discontinued and that ministry was being laid down, we began a yearly meeting-wide discernment about what we should do with these funds. And that was the precursor to the current committee. It was the, let me if I get right, it was the the Legacy Gift Ad Hoc Disbursement Committee, something like that. There was the ad hoc piece. We were charged with coming up with a process to determine what to do. And so we wrote a letter to the whole yearly meeting, and we asked friends to respond to the simple question: these funds are a gift from the past to the future. How can this money help friends answer God's call in our time? We sent that out in December, January 2013, somewhere in there. And then we waited for responses, and we got, it was just sort of amazing because yearly meetings send out minutes and requests all the time. But we asked them to respond. We gave them a deadline, and 30 monthly meetings, 3 yearly meeting bodies, 13 committees, the staff, and other groups that were involved in the yearly meeting all responded, spent a lot of time really thinking about this. And so then we received these responses. That was the beginning of the kind of holy abundance, this level of engagement of people. One of the things that really inspired us as we were drafting the letter was something that we got from the young adult friends. And then when we began our discernment, we would always put this up. I still have the piece of paper here. So it was a beautifully written letter from the young adult friends who had a retreat in sort of the turn of the year. And they said, "Let us not be distracted by the question of how to spend the money, but let us enter more deeply into the new life that is already rising up in our yearly meeting and allow the money to follow those channels. This is how we will let the living waters flow." This was from, actually, it was a year ahead of it was in 2012 that we got this letter. So that message really resonated, I think, with the members of the Ad Hoc Discernment Committee as we sat and we began to receive the responses from friends across New England. And there were many ideas, many creative ideas about what to do. There were also a lot of responses that had to do with how you look at money. There was the don't spend any of it, put it all away, and just use the income. There were the it's not our money, we should give it all away. There were there was a lot of fear, I think, in some of those responses. And so we not only sat with ideas for things that we should do, like put solar panels on all the yearly meeting houses, things like that, but how to handle and steward funds. And so as we received all of these, then we sat over several different periods, sort of looking at what we had received, praying together and trying to understand what was rising up out of these responses. And we presented our recommendations basically to have these 2 different funds that had 2 different ways of handling money, but also supporting the ministries of the New England Yearly Meeting, both within and beyond our region, in a very sort of open and what I think felt generous way. We brought this back to the yearly meeting with our first recommendation, and it was just Funds A and Funds B. That was, I think friends were not quite ready yet to move ahead with it. It took us another year sort of sitting with it and listening. And we came back and we were approved then to move forward with these two funds. We came back with more focus on guidelines and what the nature of these funds might be. And so then in fall of 2015, right after August sessions, when we were approved to go ahead, we had to figure out how to do it. How do you give away money? What's the process? What sort of applications? What are you going to ask from people? And so that took us a bit of time and lots of research and talking with other funders, what it looked like to support ministry. And we began our first funding cycle in, I think it was December 2015. And one of the most exciting things was, because we didn't really know what was going to happen. And suddenly, at the appointed day, December 1st, I was the clerk, my email box just filled up with all of these applications describing amazing work that friends were doing. So that, I think, was the feeling of the holy abundance that I think we've all experienced as part of this process. So over the past 4 years of funding, I think we've given away around close to $500,000 in grants, various range of amounts to support a whole array of amazing ministries. And you can read all about the kinds of things we've funded if you go to the yearly meeting website. I won't take up time with that now, but just a wonderful array of things that friends were doing.
Great. So I've been going back and forth here with Craig, and he's seeming to have difficulty in being able to connect, but has provided me with a link to his talking notes. So, and has given me permission to go ahead and share those with you. Let me step into that for the moment. Craig, as I mentioned, these are prep notes. They're not necessarily written to be read, but here we are reading them. So in 2011, Craig's wife, Megan, and he bought 6 houses and 130 acres that had been home to the meeting school, a radical Quaker boarding school, for the previous 60 years. And I'm going to switch to using Greg's voice here. We immediately started a small CSA vegetable farm and continued working to build an intentional community on this land. In 2016, we were 5 years into this project and trying to clarify what we wanted the farm to become. To be financially sustainable, we knew we'd need the farm to be bigger, and we knew this land could support that. Tractor cultivation could help make that possible, but we didn't like growing into further dependence on fossil fuels, and we saw that the commercially available tools were all sized for much larger farms. We wanted to grow from about 50 CSA families to 100 or 150. But most equipment dependent farms were twice that size or larger. In February of 2016, we applied for and were awarded a legacy grant. The legacy grant let us take a risk that we couldn't have otherwise afforded. I spent the following winter converting a 1948 Alice Chalmers G into an electric cultivating tractor that fit our farm well. I had no significant mechanical experience and had previously done very little electrical work. I'd see a similar machine, and I was able to read another farmer's project report from a similar build. But we really didn't know if I'd be successful or how helpful the machine would be to us. If this had strictly been a business decision, we would have had to say no to this idea. But the Legacy Fund allowed us to try for something a little bit more true and wonderful than what I knew would definitely work. The tractor is a practical help in the field. Yesterday, we used it to bring in fall cabbages and kohlrabi from our farthest field, but it's maybe more useful as a conversation starter about scale, appropriate technology, and climate change. Conversations that sometimes feel as important as the food that we grow. The Legacy Fund process required me to set up a support committee at my home meeting. Friends knew us and knew our property because of the meeting school, but this project allowed a new opportunity for us to reintroduce what our farm was becoming and invite friends to support us. This project also introduced us to friends throughout New England who had known the meeting school and/or were interested about Quaker farmers. And finally, this project has allowed me an easy way to talk about my Quaker life with other friends and CSA families who might not otherwise know that part of my life. And a for-profit small business, we might not have been an easy or obvious candidate for a grant like this. But the Legacy Fund was able to recognize that we are a mission-led business, and our work on this farm is our ministry. Applying for this grant helped us to clarify that and to share that truth with more friends. Well, for something that wasn't written to be read, you did a darn good job, Craig. When I spoke with Craig yesterday, he said he would think about some tight story, and I think you did a great job. And he talked about being out on the tractor today, and those thoughts would probably rumble around there a bit. So we've heard a little bit about the Legacy Fund and a little bit about someone who has received a grant. And what I heard from Suzanna, in addition to what Craig shared, was that the Legacy Fund has allowed people to see parts of what Quakers are doing which previously weren't as visible. So this CSA is an example. Suzanna, we're coming back to you and hearing about the approach that was used, the willingness to experiment and so on.
All right. So I think one of the things that we've tried to do in the 4 years that we've been doing this is listen to what we're hearing in the applications and in our meetings with the applicants and grantees, because we set up a program where we didn't want to be overly reliant on somebody who could write a really good grant application. We tried to create something that was pretty simple to follow, and then we do a lot of our work is in visiting with the applicants, sometimes with their members of their support committee. And so I think one of the things that was most surprising, perhaps unexpected, although if you'd really thought about it, in hindsight, it doesn't seem so, is that it's helped invigorate our Quaker process. As Craig said, he had to set up a support committee. And so our process requires someone who's applying to have a support committee, preferably with their home meeting. Occasionally it's more broad than that, so that there's accountability at the local level, for the grantee or the applicant. We've had, just as a quick example, a young woman wanted to go to the Bolivia, go to Bolivia this spring, and she was a former Quaker Voluntary Service member, and she learned about the funds, and she had to go to our ministry and council and get an oversight committee and get a travel minute and all of those things, which she hadn't ever done. And I think our ministry and council hadn't done a travel minute in a really long time. So, it's reinvigorated our process. It's also engaged the yearly meeting and monthly meetings. It's engaged the yearly meeting in the work of the monthly meetings and in Friends at a very grassroots level. That in some ways, I think our work is its own sort of visitation program. I guess the other thing we learned, sometimes, we have our deadlines, and we realized that we were getting some applications for things that were starting before our meeting, but they'd met the deadline, but they didn't know when we were going to meet. And so we were able to be a little more nimble and create what we're now calling a time-sensitive application process for things that might fall outside our two deadlines for the year. And that came about just by literally listening to what we were hearing through the application process. So we keep learning every year, and are, I think, as a committee, really willing to try something new because it's what we're hearing from Friends. At one point, this is where the abundance comes in again. It took a while to sort of figure out to dispose of all of the bills and things from the sale of the home. We knew that there was $750,000 that was set aside to be invested, and we would just use the income, but we never really knew exactly how much was going to be left because it hadn't been settled. So after the first year, when we finally got all of the settlement, we realized that we had given out $100,000 in grants, but there was more money in there than we had originally anticipated. So it just sort of, for a while, it felt like the magic pasta pot that kept filling up. But when we knew that we had more money than we had originally anticipated, we spent some time discerning about what else we might do. And through that discernment, we made a recommendation to replenish the yearly meetings fund for sufferings, which had not been well funded in a long time, and is for particularly friends who are doing civil disobedience or some action. We explored the possibility of setting up some sort of revolving fund for meeting house improvements, because we were getting a lot of applications for infrastructure, new furnace, solar panels, and that sort of thing. And then just about that time, the Friends General Conference Meeting House program was taken over and reinvigorated by Everence. So we really didn't need to do that at the, on a local level. So, we've tried to be responsive and also listening to sort of what's coming through to us. Viv, I can't hear you.
Thank you. I muted myself because I was not sure if a voice in my vicinity was coming through. So Sarah, you had talked about two things that were exciting in addition to that which we've already heard. grant recipients having a sense of their self as a ministry, as a minister, and Suzanna mentioned that the need for support and such like that. Is there more you'd care to say about that, or?
Well, I know the time is tight, and Susanna did touch on it, but I want to raise up a few things. One of which, as Craig mentioned, his work, his ministry, is a for-profit business. And I want to raise up that Friends have a very long history of supporting each other's work. This was, I studied ethics at Harvard Divinity School, and my master's thesis was on Quaker business ethics in pre-colonial and colonial, what became the United States. There's a long history of this, that we help each other in the work that we do, even if, including for-profit work. And indeed, at sessions this year, an invitation went out for all people who had received legacy grants to come to lunch together and to share a little bit with each other about their work. And I was, for many of these people, I have met them over the years. I have read their applications. And in that room were people who maybe received their grants a year or 2 years ago. And what just blew me away was how strong their voices had become. That in some cases, very small amounts of money, maybe $500 even, because our grants never get larger than $10,000, and they're often much smaller. But that naming people as ministers, that naming their leadings as ministry, allowed them to feel a certain power and have a certain voice that I think is vitalizing to the Religious Society of Friends. And also, as Susanna mentioned, because there are certain requirements for support committees for handling the finances of grant recipients, some meetings had to find their way in new territory. And I also heard at that lunch of meetings who needed to understand better how to support ministers because somebody in their meeting had received a legacy grant. And in exploring this idea, they thought, well, gee, so-and-so really has a ministry and we should support him or we should support her. And so these seeds of money that named people as ministers, that suggested how monthly meetings might support ministers, have grown even beyond the gifts of this funding. And also importantly, because I carry a concern that in New England, there's a diversity in our monthly meetings, in size, in vitality, in resources. And whether a meeting is very large or very small, sometimes that meeting just feels really pleased with itself. That there's a spiritual centeredness that is beloved by that community. And so meetings can become really isolated. But a monthly meeting is not the Religious Society of Friends. And so I am concerned that meetings, that monthly meetings, feel the power of the society, the whole society, the Religious Society of Friends, and have a voice and make connections into it for the vitality of us all beyond New England, beyond this country. And I think in some really small way, growing, the Legacy Gifts Committee and those grants are beginning to invite that communication to invite us out of the beloved silos of our monthly meetings, to have a public voice, to reach beyond, to own our ministry, to own that we preach, that we have something to say to the world. And we have found our way to this, and this is the great abundance, that we had some little seeds that we kind of tossed around. And for many of them, we didn't even understand what we were planting. And they are bearing fruit beyond what I think. Suzanna and I have been in this since the very beginning, beyond what I ever imagined. It has been remarkable in spreading ministry in New England and a bit beyond.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And I have word that that Craig is connected by voice now.
Can we try that? Can you hear me, friends?
Yes, sir, we can. Great.
Wow. All right. Thank you.
Great to hear your voice.
Wonderful
Thank
to
you.
hear you, Craig.
Thank you for being patient. I see that we're close to time for questions, so maybe I should hold there, but I'm happy to be in this call, and we'll stay as available as technology allows me to be.
Well, if there's anything further that you care to share, we welcome that as well.
Well, thank you. The other part of the story for me, I went from being a grantee to serving on the committee. Part of our role as a committee, we do visitation. As much as we're able, we go out and we visit the applicants at their home meeting, at the site of their project. And that's allowed me to have opportunity to travel all around New England and meet friends, see different meetings, and also meet friends in their places of worship. So that's been a continuing gift for me to deepen my relationship with all of the yearly meeting through serving on this committee, and to find threads that run through projects. So so much of my work is food and food justice related. So I tend to go out and review projects that are environmental based and sometimes food based. And we've twice had applications specifically about food justice, gleaning and redistribution work. And again, projects that I wouldn't have known exist in this community of friends in New England, but I've gotten to go out and see them firsthand. That's been a great opportunity.
Great. So is there anything more from the panelists that you feel like you'd like to share? And then we'll go into an open discussion or Q&A.
So I'd like to say that it only became clear to me this summer that what we as a committee were doing was its own form of ministry, and that for me personally, this was a form of ministry. And what I'm hoping might happen is that other yearly meetings might hang on a second, something is happening here. Might be inspired to do their own kind of legacy. You know, it doesn't take a lot of money. I think it takes the willingness to be open-hearted and say yes. And I think that's where I think the abundance comes from. I suspect that every yearly meeting has some money somewhere that they could do something similar, and plant new seeds and support the work of Friends in the World. It's a joy to be able to do, and you know, I'd love to see somebody else try it, and you know, we would love to share our experiences more closely with anyone who's interested in taking that risk. I think there's a lot of resources out there, and we should put them to use.
Right. Berta, I'm thinking, Berta and I have been members of the same meeting, and there's a fellow named George Willoughby who was the reason that I came to Quakerism and who served on my spiritual accountability group for a number of years until his death. He was fond of saying that the money's out there. We just have to turn the people upside down and get it out of their pockets. So what questions do we have? What experiences do we have in our Ruth Ann? I'll either you can unmute yourself or I can unmute you. Maybe. It's not unmuting.
Unmute now.
There you go.
How's that?
Good.
Okay. First of all, I have to thank everybody. And Viv, I want to thank you for recording these sessions because I have been listening to them when I can't be on. It's been a big blessing. Craig, I have to thank you because you have blessed my family very much. I have a daughter who went to meeting school and when you were there, and my son volunteered for a while at Sun Moon Farms. So are you still there, Craig? Is he still on the line? I
Yes.
just want to thank him for his courage. So I want to thank him for his courage, and I want to thank the Legacy Fund for supporting him because my family benefited very much from his work. The other thing I wondered, I'm very fond of Pendle Hill pamphlets. and I know that there's like a future that might look very different in the way we share our testimonies. But I'm curious if you all have considered doing some kind of a Pendle Hill pamphlet. And if you have, I'm wondering if you consider both the story of those who funded these buildings as the backstory, in some way explaining how their seeds are carrying on. And in this way, we are freeing people who are stuck somewhere, you know, stuck not wanting to let go of a ministry they promised to steward, even though it's not doing what it was intended to do anymore. When they see this example of those seeds are still bringing fruit, and look at all the fruit they're bringing, maybe it would help people free some resources. And lastly, I just want to throw this out there. I'm experimenting with a new form of storytelling, and my goal has been to get young people interested in a certain form of technology, and then they interview their elders. They capture the stories in whatever artistic way they want, a PowerPoint presentation or a little slideshow or audio visual, you know, maybe an interview of some kind. And then they upload it to a map, and they create an interactive map for the descendants of that person to add to in creative ways. And so these are more than the traditional story map, which can sometimes just be a series of pictures with some text. This is an interactive map. And I just sensed that these houses that once cared for so many people might have a map about all their ripple effects when they were caring for spinsters. But then another map would take us into the future of all these legacy funds. So I think that would be an amazing project to facilitate with young people. If anyone ever wanted to pursue it, I would be glad to help with it.
That's a really cool idea. I love it. I took notes. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
Great. Does anybody else want to come in here and ask a question or share something about what's happening in your particular region? Paulette?
Audio. Okay, I think I did it now.
Yep, you got it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I really didn't pay attention to what the topic was going to be tonight. I just have been trying to make it to one of these, and I finally did. But I'm glad I did. It's really inspiring to hear the stories, and thank you. But I also just thought I'd mention that in my Quaker meeting in Cincinnati, we have a fund called the Cannon Fund, and it came from a house that was sold. I don't know the whole story, but Josephine Cannon had lived in this house, and so she basically willed the house to the meeting, and the meeting had to decide what to do with it, and they decided to sell it, and it actually became a wonderful farm that is still, people are still living on it and working it, but who are very conscious earthwise. But it also, the money that she wanted, when it was sold, the money that the meeting made on it went into a fund for our meeting to support ministry. Or not, well, really it was more to support spiritual development of the members, or social justice ministry. Those were the two things. So I have benefited from that. Largely the people that access it are using it to go to Friends General Conference or to our yearly meeting to be able to afford to do those things. But there was one person that started a prison ministry effort, and so there's been various ministries. Some of the funding was used to for one member to start a local food guide, and so that's still going on about 10 years later, and it's now distributed citywide in Cincinnati, and it's just been really helpful. It's grown and grown to show all the farms that you can go to and where all the farmers markets are and all these different types of food. So anyway, just thought I'd throw in there that our little meeting has done something similar, but we don't have that at a yearly meeting level. And it's something that I think would be good to raise, because I think there's people at other meetings. Sometimes I feel a little sad that we have this at our meeting that other meetings don't, so I've been able to do things that other people haven't been able to do in my own ministry.
Great. I might add that on a monthly meeting level, both Berta and I are on the Committee on Gifts and Leadings of Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting, which has had differing amounts of its treasury, which it devotes to ministers under the care of the meeting who have a need for those funds. And our prayers, your prayers are certainly welcome as we step into asking the meeting for far more than we have in the past in that regard. We'll see what the response is, but. So we're at the end of our time. Is there anything that's pressing and needs to be said before we sign off, in addition to me just telling you where we are going next with these kinds of calls? Jenny.
Ruth Ann had a question which I can answer. I can touch on if you want.
So I saw Jenny's hand up, and it did sound like Jenny talking, but was that you, Sarah, saying something to touch on?
There was in the chat box, there's a question.
Okay. Yes. Is it true at one time Friends did not allow Friends to go bankrupt? Is it true, Sarah?
There was certainly a very strong tradition that if you were a Quaker business person, that there were committees within your meeting that visited you at your business and looked at your books, looked at all the details of your accounting. And Friends also provided loans to other Quaker businesses at very good rates. There were a wide variety of supports that significantly helped Quaker businesses grow in the colonies and survive a variety of forms of calamity. And because of communication and relationship between England and the colonies, a lot of money, business ideas, practices, and trade happened quite internally within Quaker circles that was very profitable for early Friends. So there would have been instances where Friends did not allow other Friends to go bankrupt.
Great. And Jenny, did you have something that you wanted to offer?
I do. I was really taken by something that Suzanna said, and also that something that Sarah was sharing. And it just got me thinking about how often meetings receive a bequest, not quite this amount, but some amount, and it gets them in to practice how to be stewards and how to have a stewardship worldview that I have never seen happen at the budget conversation for a monthly meeting, where people are being asked to give their own money to the vision. But suddenly, once the question is, someone gave you $10,000, what will you do with it? That Suzanna was saying, one of the pieces of abundance was the engagement of people, and I was made, corporate discernment, learning how to do ministry oversight, learning how to tease out gifts from not gifts. And I just, having been in a team of people twice who've received these grants, I had not thought about the value that it was giving in that direction also. And it just, it makes me really hope that there will be a way to tie that piece in where people will want to bring their own resources. I'm sort of imagining this as a cooking metaphor where somebody gave us a bag of groceries, so now we have to go and cook. But like, what if we had to bring our own groceries and make our way around in the kitchen as a group of people, not in our own kitchen, but, in my view, in God's kitchen. And so like, how are we going to cook together and bring something to the table? So it's been great to hear from the other side how this is looked.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny, for those different pieces coming together in a way that I think that the people, Suzanna and Sarah and Craig are aware, and more of us can become so. Thank you so much. So thank you to those of you who have brought your gifts in service to the Religious Society of Friends in that big way, and for your sharing them here today. This is going to be available for many more people to see and benefit from. And just to let you know, Paulette said she was coming on. She didn't know what the topic was, but to let folk know that the topic in October will be faithfulness groups. Marcel Martin, who has been offering program funded by Legacy monies, is going to be the speaker, along with Benjamin Warnke and Hillary Bergen, who had previously been advertised as participating, now has a conflict, so she won't be able to join. And then that's October 24th from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern time. So those of you who have a premonition that it's an hour earlier, great. And then in November, we're going to be, thanks to Jenny and the Quaker Women in Public Ministry, offering a workshop in Philadelphia with Marcel and myself on faithfulness group. So it'll be a larger plunge into that experience, and we'll be able to live stream that. My hope is, Marcel and I will talk tomorrow about the planning for that program. My hope is that we would be able to upload to the Releasing Ministry Opps page handouts so that people could come together and run the workshop in your local area via the live stream. And thanks to Quaker Women in Public Ministry for the assistance in allowing that live stream to happen. So a moment of gratitude, and then we can sign off, friends, with great thanks to all who are here and those who will see us there hereafter. What I'll do in close is offer that if anyone wants to be on the mailing list for this material, you can email me at friendviv, the number 2, at gmail.com. Friendviv2, the number 2, at gmail.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Nice meeting you across the country.
Thank you all. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Let's see.
Okay, so we have a few people remaining still. So here we are, the panel, and me. How are you doing?
Viv,
Yes.
this has been the most gracefully run Zoom call I've ever been on. You have a real skill and grace and presence. Should you ever want more work guiding people in how to do a good Zoom call, that work is waiting for you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm always so nervous beforehand and feel so inept in the moment. So I appreciate that. But what I can say too is that each of you brought real gold to this conversation. And Craig, I can't believe how well prepared you were for us to stand in for you almost.
Well, Viv, can you hear me now? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I tell you my favorite part? I don't know if you noticed, but so I share this house with 5 other adults. So the call in by phone seemed easy until I picked up the line and somebody's on the phone. I finally got through, and then the person who was at the other end of I'm in the basement. She finished the call, and then she went upstairs and turned off all the lights. But the light switch is all the way at the other end of the house. So I hope that wasn't all too distracting, but I was able to stay in that this whole time and at least had audio to hear everybody else. So thank you for making that possible.
Great. It was terrific what you shared, and
thank you.
It's so true for you too, Suzanna and Sarah. Thank you.
Well, Viv, I want to thank you for thinking of us. I feel like you've been a guiding light for me when we first started this, and I just kind of knew who you were just anecdotally, and then called you, and when we were trying to figure out what we were going to do, how are we going to do this program, and you had such resources, and I don't know, you've just you've been such a supporter, and as we've gone about this work, so it's just been invaluable, and I'm very appreciative.
Well, it's golden what you're doing.
You know, and you've come twice to do our workshops, and I've learned so much from those, and you know.
Yes, so have I. So thank you for having them.
Okay. I guess the one thing that wasn't, I don't think I was able to say enough of is how the way that this program has connected people in the yearly meeting. You know, there's this sort of core group of people that are really active in the yearly meeting, and there's so much more that's going on, and it's created this like just sort of loop of flow of support and information and awareness that I think we couldn't have anticipated. And you know, two of the members of the committee, Craig and Sue Rockwood, are both past grantees, and we've kind of built a committee very intentionally and slowly, and an idea for it was, you know, let's get the perspective of grantees, and that's been really a gift, you know, and instead of sort of the usual,
right?
You know, and it's enabled people to participate in a larger program. You know, Craig doesn't go to yearly meeting in the summer. He's a farmer, you know. And he's been such a wonderful member of the committee and has contributed so much. So there's so many ways to serve.
And it sounds like a whole lot of people are learning about Quakers as they pick up their CSA box.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Craig's farm letters are a ministry in themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah, they really are.
Great. Is there, what I forgot to do was typically, I'm going to end the recording now, but we'll still